Hey everyone, and welcome to Sasquatch Theory. In this interview, we have Randy Harrington from the Kansas, Missouri area, and he is here to talk about his Bigfoot encounters, his experiences, and the research that he's done out in the field throughout the years. Randy was very kind to me, and we hit it off great talking about Bigfoot activity and different methods used to capture evidence. Randy is willing to get out in the field and stay for days at a time in order to obtain any evidence that he can find. It was really cool to see his Autel thermal drone in action, and you were able to pick up heat signatures from a really far distance. I have wanted to get the same thermal drone for a while now, but they are certainly a pricey piece of equipment. During our investigation of the area, we could hear something on the parabolic microphone coming up the ridge. We could also hear some branch breaking when we were cooking food, and some possible wood knocking during the night. It's really hard to determine if it was truly Bigfoot activity, but we were keeping our eyes peeled and our ears open. In this video, Randy will share his Bigfoot encounters and experiences with us on the channel, and he discusses his tactics out in the field when looking for the hairy people. If you guys enjoy Sasquatch Theory, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you have a Bigfoot encounter that you would like to talk about with me, please contact me at sasquatchtheory@outlook.com. You can now find my interviews on Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, and many other platforms if you guys are interested in listening to Bigfoot encounters on the go. Alright guys, let's dive into Randy Harrington's Bigfoot encounters here on Sasquatch Theory.
You and I, Miguel, we were talking earlier, and I mentioned something that happened in 2003 by Mount Magazine in Arkansas, and I specifically was there after years of doing online searches and reading of reports and listening to people. At that point, that was my first foray into the subject with boots on the ground. I wanted to say, could I go out in the woods and just look around? If I was paying attention, is there anything that I could find that made me question anything? And indeed, I did have something happen, as I mentioned to you about that pile of feathers and the smell. But that wasn't a significant happening. But it was just enough for me to say, maybe they are out. Maybe they are out here in the woods. And so that was the very beginning, 2003. And I went down after that in 2004 to, I think, the very first Honubby Bigfoot Festival conference. And it was the first one, and I thought to myself, wow, they're having an event where Bigfoot people will meet up, and I thought to myself, I need to go down there and meet somebody that can help me, because I'm very interested. At this point, I was very interested in it, and basically was just trying to do some camping, not knowing very much about anything other than what I'd read. So I went down to that event in 2004, and I had missed it. I had gotten there in the evening, and everybody was just about gone on the last day.
Oh, man.
And so I was like, man, I'm very disappointed. I didn't know what to do. So at the time, I had a four-wheeler, and I was buying as cheap equipment that I could afford. And my very first piece of equipment was one of those $500 binocular night vision that you can drop down over your eyes. It has the head harness. So I'm driving my four-wheeler around on logging roads with no headlights, looking around with these goggles, night goggles on.
Yeah.
So it was kind of funny, but I'm tootling along on this logging road. I come up out of some bottoms and all of a sudden I see a vehicle with a tarp all pulled over it and pulled around it, and somebody sitting there in a chair. And so I flip my things up, I turn my lights on, because I don't want them to think I'm up to no good creeping around in the dark. So I tootle along up there, and since it was the same evening at the last day of the first conference, I just asked him straight up. I said, you hearing anything interesting? And the guy looked at me, and he looked at his wife, and he was like, oh, what the hell? Yeah, we heard some knocks over here, and something back up over here. And so that was the first person that I ever met that accepted me, but the way I asked him, he pretty much had to tell me because I just assumed he was a Bigfoot person. Who else would be sitting out there in the dark, at the same weekend of a Bigfoot conference in this locale? So his name was Keith, and we became friends. We started joining up all the time. He lived in St. Paul, or Paul's Valley, Oklahoma, which is 3 hours to the west. And so we just became friends, and we started meeting down there. And then there would be times where I'd come down and swing, pick him up, and we'd both go to the Kaimichis. Well, come to find out, his interest started because of activity that he had had in the Chickasaw National Park south of Sulphur, which was one town away from where he lived. And I would ask him, why in the world would you even come out here if you've got Bigfoots at that park? And he's like, well, they're wilder here. They're more. He said, it's just different. It's different here than at the park. And so, needless to say, it culminated in 2005. He and I got what we call the Ridgewalker video on a ridge there in Oklahoma. And after that, I went to the Chickasaw Park for the first time the next February in 2006. I actually took him home one night, and he told me what campsite to go to. I went to that campsite, had the most incredible encounter that I've ever had since Shane walked up on that little one at the 400. But before that, that was like the grand poobah of all encounters from what I was able to see and encounter that night. And I've told that story a million times. I mean, you can find it anywhere on, podcasts and stuff. I mean, it's a long, 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 drawn-out story. I mean, do you really want me to go into everything about it? Because it's really fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I personally do. I think that'd be cool if you want to.
Oh, I mean, but you've heard it though, haven't you?
I don't think so.
Okay. I'm going to interject things about this story that I didn't know at the time of things were happening that I found out afterwards. So I'm going to lay that out first. Mm-hmm. There was a gentleman that lived in Sulphur named Charles Hallmark. He has passed away a long time ago from cancer. But I spoke to him on the phone after my encounter there and found these things out. He had a sighting in that park, and he started becoming obsessed with it and started trying to figure them out, and he would go down there and do things. Well, he was setting up a baiting system in the off-season, where he would go in and put baits in the trash cans there. Mm. At the time, the trash cans were just the 3-foot-tall metal with and there would be a chain attached to a cinder block that they would have cinder blocks sitting on top of the very generic trash can system for a park system of trash cans. But it was in these trash cans that he would bait them. Mm. And he told me on the phone all of the things that he had done. And he says, I found out, there were certain foods that they would like, certain foods that he didn't like. And he said that he was trying to get their fingerprints. And the way he said fig Newtons are one of the foods that they ended up finding out that they liked a lot. He said, so he would put fig Newtons in the bottom of a cup, put a bag of microwave popcorn sitting right on top of the cup, and when they would remove the bag, they'd get butter on their fingers. And then take the cup and leave fingerprints on the cups. So he had this poster board with all of these huge fingerprints all over it, and that he was, documenting. And he was telling me about, he said there were times I'd buy bags of food when I was trying to figure out what foods they liked. And I would buy like some McDonald's stuff and, put candy bars and some other stuff. And he said, and you got to understand, this is back in 2006 when I'm having this conversation with him after I had my own encounter there. So he's telling me things that we know now as a community is a fact, that these things, how these things are. And he said that he would roll up a bag, have several different types of food in the bottom of these trash cans, have it all set up. And when he'd come back the next day to check it out, the trash can would look all the same. He said, I would take the cinder block off, take the lid off, look in, and the bag would be rolled up. It's like nothing was there. And I would say to myself, they didn't hit this one. And then I'd reach down to grab the bag and it would feel light. He said I would unroll it and come to find out they only took one item out of it and rolled it all back up and put it all back in place. When he said that, I think it just brushed over me. That information brushed over me. But now I've seen these things happen where they are very select. They don't want you to know that they've been there. Even at a camp table, only one thing will be moved, but our audio will show that they've dug through every box. But you'd only see one item moved. That, to be species wide, is incredible. That they are so stealthy that their curiosity wants them to come look through our stuff, but they're smart enough to know to leave everything in its place. So to only take one item and roll everything, put it back the way it was, this culminates later during my encounter. So now let's skip forward to my encounter.
Okay.
He quit doing these experiments. It was 2 years later that I'm at the park. I'm there in February. It's the off season, no camp host, no other campers. I was the only one there. And I was told to go to a campsite 30, which is where my friend Keith and his wife had all kinds of encounters. He'd seen them. He'd seen a little one. He described it was about 3 foot tall. He said, I think it took a liking to my wife. His wife had red hair, and she was extremely a loud woman, very loud woman. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if it was the red hair or if it was the fact that she was a very loud spoken woman and very, she could tell she ruled the roost over Keith. Uh-huh. So could it be a combination of her demeanor of being a very aggressive woman or the red hair or the both? But needless to say, he said that it seemed like that little one in the park took a liking to her and would always come around when they were there. He said to the point where one time she got in their car to take off to go to town to get something, and he saw the little one take off running through the brush and jumped the little roads that they have there in the park. And he said, and he described the way the little one jumped the road. It had its knees pulled up all the way to its chest while it was in the air. Oh, wow. Interesting description. I don't know if you can ever verify that unless somebody else says they see the same thing. But this all comes out later when I'm there and I have my encounter because it involves about a 5.5 foot tall juvenile with a large male. So he's telling me stories of a little one that seems to run the park. Certainly that little one has a parent. So the night that I have my encounter there, it involves all of these components where something's going in through the trash can that Hallmark had set up. And it's just fascinating. So I get there to the park and I pull around, and it's the roads going through this park. There's about 125 campsites, and they're all separated with gravel pathways. They're all along Rock Creek. There's spring-fed creeks, sulfur creeks through this whole park system. It's a pretty big park system, but the Rock Creek area primarily sits along Rock Creek, and campsite 30 is very close proximity to Rock Creek. And I'm going to tell you, when I pulled in there, it was, dusk. It was right before dark. And I set up my campsite. There was no camp host. I was the only person there. So I knew I was alone. So I left my campsite. I had my tent set up and some other stuff. And the park is a one-way drive. So you can only go in one way and then pull into your park. So you have to be parked you can't turn around and face the other way. So, because then it's just all set up for a one-way system. So when I parked into my campsite, the tent is on one side. You have big rocks where they set big rocks up so that you can't pull off into the camp area. Mm-hmm. There's only a certain area that you can park at. So it's really extreme in the positioning of my truck. Believe me, I wish I'd have had my truck in a different position. But so I set my tent and everything up, and I went into town to grab me something to eat. When I came back, I stopped up at the front of the park where the camp host is because my plan was to make my campsite appear abandoned. Because there was a report, and you could read these reports back then from the sheriff's department. They would put them in the paper. People would call in reports, and that's how the Bigfooters in that area were researching the park, because of campers that would report to the sheriff's department, and it would be in the newspaper. So there was a lady who said that she got knocked over by something hairy when she came out of the bathroom. That was in the sheriff's report in the newspaper. Someone else said that they came back into their camp, and there was somebody in their camp that ran away from their camp covered in hair, when they'd come back to camp at 11 o'clock one night. So I took those reports and I thought to myself, okay, because of what my friend Keith said, they're in the park. They've got to be in the park. And because they were in this one's camp where they came back at 10 or 11 o'clock at night and saw it running out of their camp, I said, that means it came into their camp when it thought the camp was empty. So that's the one sighting that I based my whole thing there on. I wanted them to think my campsite was empty, even when I was there. So at the beginning of the campsite, I taped blankets up on the inside of my cab. It was a crew cab diesel truck with ladder racks on the back, and I had blankets taped up all to my windows, and I had them to where I could separate them over the steering wheel, and I could separate them right here at the corner where I was at. But there was stuff stacked in my seat. I still had camping supplies and Tupperware containers all. So it wasn't like my truck was empty and I was the only one. There was an ice chest beside me. So the cab was still full of stuff, but I was sitting in the driver's seat and I had my windows all taped up. So I drive back to my campsite and it's starting to get dark, and I get to my campsite and all I can see is out of the opening that I had over my steering wheel. My plan was that if I had an encounter that night, that I would just hit my headlights and film through my windshield. That's why I made sure that my blankets could open right over the steering wheel. My plan was to never give away that I was in the cab. And if I could ever catch one in the front of my truck, I was just going to start recording so that it's recording as I'm looking through the glass, open it up, and then turn on my headlights. That was my plan, to catch one. So here's what happened. I get into camp, my truck is all closed up, I have a jar to pee in. I don't even want to open my doors for nothing. The moment I stopped my truck, I never wanted to give away that I was there. It was dead camp. So I'm sitting in, and I had a parabolic mic, the same ones that you saw over here on my logs. I had one sitting on top of my truck with a magnet, and I had the headset inside my truck with the door closed on the cord so I can just sit there and listen with my headset. So I'm listening to everything that's going on. You hear wind blow, you hear nighttime sounds. We're not too far from the town of Sulphur. I could hear vehicles. You can hear vehicles at red lights, maybe a teenager squealing his tires or something like that. So that's how close this park is to a town. So I'm sitting there in the truck. It's dark now, and so it must be a couple hours later, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. And you get used to the cadence of the nighttime sounds, whether it's just like this. It has its own ambiance where it's got its own melody. And in the moment you hear something that's off, you jar awake, like footsteps. And that's what I heard. I'm just sitting there. I'm starting to lull because it's just the night is pleasant. Then all of a sudden I hear through dead leaves. And I'm like, okay, I hear something. And so I'm paying attention. I'm listening. I hear walking, crunching through leaves as it's walking. And then the moment I hear something that it took me a second to figure out what it was, I heard a stick being dragged through gravel. And I realized I did not know what the park looked like at that time because I'd never walked through the park. I'd only pulled in there, set my camp up, went and got something to eat. So I didn't really know the layout of the park. I'm only telling you what I've heard. It sounded like a stick being dragged through gravel, but then it would go back into walking in leaves. So if he's still dragging the stick, I wouldn't know because you wouldn't hear it because it's not dragging through gravel anymore. He might still be dragging it through the leaves, but I'm hearing the footsteps in the leaves. And then occasionally I would hear the stick being dragged through gravel. What I realize now is every campsite is connected with gravel pathways that goes to the bathrooms and stuff. So there's gravel pathways throughout this whole park. And then I hear my first trash can lid being opened and put back on. So something was looking in the trash cans. It was a chilly, chilly night, probably in the early 40s, low 40s, maybe even the high 30s. It was very chilly. It was in February, so it was chilly. And it's the off season. Nobody camps. There's nobody camping there, so much so that there's no camp host or anything. So here's my reasoning at the time. If it's a homeless person in the park trying to catch a meal, they should know that there's no trash being accumulated in those parks in the off season. There's nobody camping. So whatever I'm hearing is going from trash can, and then I hear it walking, dragging a stick, and then I hear it go ping, and it took me a second. I'm like, what is that? I hear footsteps, stick dragging, ping, and I'm like, something's hitting the metal lantern post as it's going through the park, and then I'll hear another trash can lid pop open. So something is systematically going from trash can to trash can, meandering through these pathways, dragging a stick. Whenever it would see a metal lantern post, ding, hit it with a stick, like you would expect a kid to behave. Because I indeed, here shortly will tell you, I see a 5.5 footer. He was probably the one going through the park because he's acting like a kid. What I didn't know until it happened, there was a second one that was there also that I didn't know until the moment he stepped out. Mm-hmm. So I'm hearing this process where it's going through the park, ding, pong, drag a stick, look in the trash can, put the lid back on, and put the cinder block back on. It put everything back together. It's just going through the park looking. What I didn't know is it's looking for the baits that Charles Hallmark had been setting up. They were occasionally coming back checking to see if his baiting system was still going on. It wasn't, because he got cancer and ended up dying. Okay. But I was a beneficiary of his baiting system. They were there specifically to see if he was putting stuff in the trash cans again, and I just happened to be the only person there camping. So the moment that it sees my campsite, I know it, because all of a sudden it stopped. It had been moving constantly for a long time at that point, 45 minutes, 50 minutes through the whole park. And then all of a sudden it stops. And I'm listening and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, it sees me. It has to see my truck. It has to see my campsite. And then I hear it and stop. And stop. It was moving and stopping. And I'm thinking to myself, he's going from tree to tree at this point. He's moving to the next tree. And that's what it sounded like. I hadn't seen anything yet. I was only putting a pattern of what I was hearing, the best pattern that I could with what I was hearing. I'm like, he's moving from tree to tree. At this point, I know he's close. He must be close because he has to see my this behavior means he's looking at my campsite and he's stalking my campsite. So I'm breaking my covers and I'm looking out and I'm trying to see if I can see any movement. There was a full moon that night, so it was very bright. So I'm looking through my covers and I'm looking in my side mirror. Now it was a diesel crew cab truck, Ford F-250. The side mirrors are huge. So I'm looking in the side mirror down the driver's side of my truck to a patch of woods behind my truck. And I see a shadowy movement back there. Mm-hmm. And so I'm looking at it where I saw that shadow moving, and then I see this here on the side of a tree. I see two hands go and then duck back behind the tree. And at that moment, it looked human. It had a human form. So I'm like, he's right behind my truck. That's where he's at, and I knew where he was, and I could see the tree that he'd ducked back behind. And so at that point, it still could have been a person, because that's all I saw. It was a human form, and then duck back behind the tree. And then it hit a tree with that stick. Up to that point, a tree was never hit. Only the metal lantern posts were hit, and the stick was being drug. Here's the first time that it actually hit a wood structure, wood on wood. And then I heard sloshing coming across the creek. And he was joined by a second one. Now I need to interject in there before I go on to what happens after this, because it was brought to my attention when the little one was going through the park and hitting metal lantern posts. Clearly he was doing that so that the big one that was on the other side of the creek in the thick stuff knew where he was in the park. Because when he hit the tree, it was almost immediate sloshing coming across the creek, and the big one was right there. So that means he had been following along the backside of that creek with the sounds that the little one was making going through the park, so that the big one would know where he was. That's the only thing that makes sense.
Yeah, they're letting each other know where they're at.
And he never hit a tree until he needed the big one to come across. So that means they had communications before that. You need me, buddy? Hit a tree. Don't hit a tree unless you need me. But if you hit a tree, I'm coming. Because that's what happened. He'd never hit a tree before. And you'd think lackadaisically going through the park and using that stick for everything, dragging it and hitting the lantern post, you'd think he would hit a tree too, but he never did. But when he did hit the tree, sloshing came across the creek and he was joined by a second one. Now at that point, I'm only speculating that it's the little one in the park. I still don't know, because I'd never got a size reference of the single one that looked out around the tree. All I know is at that point, I heard sloshing coming across the creek, and the creek was right behind another campsite going down away from where he was at. But I still know to be looking at that spot. So I'm looking at that spot, and then I hear these owl calls. And I've got those recorded, on one of my YouTube videos. Well, actually, I've got this whole thing recorded. But anyways, it did an owl call. And I was never really sold on these things mimicking other animals or other things yet. I'm still accumulating information. So to have all of these things happen in one sighting where they clearly are communicating intelligently about what I'm going to do if I need your help. This is what you do. I need to know where you're at in the park, so you be hitting those lantern posts. And all of these things were taking place. And then all of a sudden, when they were both back there behind that cluster of trees, I hear, whoo! And it was loud. And I was like, holy shit. Never heard an owl yet. That whole night that I'm there, I haven't heard an owl at all. And then all of a sudden, I hear a loud one. And I know it's him. 7 seconds later, whoo! 7 seconds later, whoo! There were 17 owl calls in a row within 3 minutes. And they seemed to got louder each time. And we had, at the time, we had someone put it on a spectrogram, and indeed, they were getting louder each time. So either that owl was just doing it louder each time, or it was moving closer each time. None of that made any sense. What does make sense, it was a Bigfoot testing the campsite. And he was getting louder each time to see if he could get somebody to stir in the campsite. That's what made sense. And it was backed up on the spectrogram showing that it got louder each time. On the 17th time, woo! That was the last one. But what happened after that is they both broke out of the wood line and come up to the back of my truck, and I saw both of them. The big one was walking like this, leaned over with his arms swinging. His hands were about a foot off the ground, swinging, and the little one was on his flank. And they actually bumped into each other as they were both trying to get to the back corner of my truck. Imagine this being the back corner of the bed of my truck, and you sitting in about where the cab is. Mm-hmm. They moved to this part of the truck. The little one moved in behind the tailgate and ducked down. The big one was standing right here at the corner of my truck, and I had a full view of his whole body in my side mirror. He grabbed the ladder rack, the post on the back of my ladder rack, and I saw his thumb pointing up when he grabbed it. I saw the hair on his shoulders. His shoulders looked like bowling balls. I saw the moonlight coming through the hair on his shoulders, almost like the hair was frothed up, fluffed up, like hackles. So I could see light coming through the hair on his shoulders. His other hand grasped the cross beam on the back of my ladder racks, and he was looking over the ladder racks at my campsite. I had a table with food on it sitting over there. They never once stepped out from behind the truck. He positioned himself in a position that placed the truck between him and what he would be perceived to be the most imminent danger, is somebody coming out of that tent. Mm-hmm. He put the truck between him and the tent.
Okay, yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I've heard of them doing that.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And it looked like he was about to break down the driver's side of my truck, and I immediately went into panic mode because I thought he was coming down, and my doors weren't locked. Stupid, yes, but I really didn't think that I would be having an encounter. I was hoping to have an encounter, but I certainly didn't know any of this was going to happen to this extent. And one of the thoughts in my head was, I just saw him have a thumb and a hand that grasped the ladder racks just like I would. And he's coming down to my side of the truck where I'm just hunkered down behind the driver's door, and he's got hands. So that's one of the multitude of many thoughts going through my head simultaneously in the panic mode of, and I didn't want him to know I was in the truck. I mean, I did not want him to know I was in the truck. My heart was racing. I kind of rolled in behind my A-post as I thought he was coming down. So I thought he was coming down the truck, and I was in panic mode. I rolled in behind my A-post, and I could look down, and my chest was going boom, 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 boom. And I actually pulled my back off the seat because I thought, if he's touching my truck, he can feel my heartbeat. And I didn't want him to know I was in there. So I'm like, he can't. I guarantee you, if you could have looked at the hood of my truck with me in there, with the way my heart was beating, you could see the vibration of my heart beating, because I was, that's what I was thinking anyway.
The adrenaline going.
Yeah, and I was like, man, so I pulled my back off the truck, and I was like, oh God, please don't come up here. And so while that was happening, almost immediately, with those thought processes going, the ass end of my truck squatted down. And so for that moment, I knew where he was. I thought he was in the bed of my truck. I was like, oh my God, he's in the bed of my truck. My truck was brand new at the time. And I'm still trying to process everything that's happening. I hear stuff going on in the back of my truck. I hear stuff being moved around in the back of my truck. And I'm thinking he's in the bed of my truck because the ass end of my truck just squatted like a toad. I was like, he's in my truck. He's got to be in my truck. And so I'm thinking, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I put my hand on my key in the ignition. And I said, if I see a crinkle on the top of my cab, I said, there's no way this cab is not going to collapse with him on the top. He was huge. So I was prepared to start my engine up with a Bigfoot in the bed of my truck if it looked like he was going to climb onto the cab of my truck.
Yeah.
But here's what happened. I immediately heard him rummaging through stuff in the back of my truck. I heard stuff being scooted around. So I knew where he was, so I could have relaxed just at least a moment, at least not that he wasn't climbing on the cab of my truck. So stuff is being looked at in the back of my truck. And then I have two green propane tanks. Hold that, I'm gonna grab these propane tanks.
Okay.
I had two propane tanks in the back corner of my truck with all of these other camping supplies, and I had a generator. While they're shuffling stuff, scooting stuff around, looking at stuff in the back of my truck. Now remember, the little one had moved in behind my tailgate, so I'm assuming that the little one had stood up. At this point, I was all curled up behind my A-post. I wasn't looking at nothing.
Yeah.
But I heard stuff being shuffled around and moved around in the back of my truck. And then I hear, and all activity stopped. And I heard, something was playing with those two tanks and the sound that they were making. So needless to say, I listened for a little while longer. I heard stuff moved around. I'm waiting for something to happen. Nothing significant happens, and then it just kind of peters out and stops. Whatever was on the truck, it gets off. I don't feel the pressure on the truck anymore. And then I hear what I think is that stick hitting another lantern post. Ding! You know, like I'd heard before. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, okay, they're leaving. They're going somewhere. They're walking, and it's back to hitting the lantern post with a stick. What I didn't realize is that metal that I was hearing was the two tanks being tapped.
Oh, the whole time.
He had stole them. The little one had stole the tanks. Took them with him. So the second batch of metal that I was hearing was the two tanks being, and these have a lot of plastic on them. The tanks back then were all metal. So they took the two little green propane tanks, were tapping on them as they were leaving the area. So the next day, when I get out, I sat there till daylight, waiting for them to come back, because they had never come to the front of the truck. My plan was to still, film, catch one on camera. So I thought maybe they'll come back. And something did come back, but I couldn't be sure that it wasn't raccoons. Went to the table, and this time messed with the table. But I couldn't see. It was on the other side of the truck, and I still wasn't going to shake my truck in case it was a Bigfoot, and I still wanted it to come to the front of my truck. So I still remained quiet and hoping that my plan would still come to fruition, and that is I needed one to come to the front of my truck so I could film through my windshield. So I stuck to my guns and waited, hoping that would happen. Anyway, so whatever came to the table ended up leaving, and I don't know what it was. I thought it may be a second set of Bigfoots that may involve a smaller one. I don't know. Didn't see anything, so I can't say for sure.
Yeah.
But the next day in my investigation, and I was trying to find fingerprints on my truck, on the ladder racks. I was trying to find hairs. There were two smudge marks on the extreme outsides of my bumper. Dirty smudge marks. And I assumed that it was that's where the big one stepped up onto my bumper when it squatted down. And the rummaging around in the back of my truck when I thought he was in the bed of my truck was clearly him leaning over the ladder racks, messing with stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it was him or the little one that took the little tanks. I just know that that's where the little one had ducked down. So if that little one stood up and the tanks were right there, that's why I'm just assuming the little one took the tanks, and he was the one probably hitting the post coming into my campsite. So he would be the one most inquisitive about the sounds they were making, possibly.
Yeah.
So that's just all speculation. But I did see them. I saw them. I watched them. His lat muscles went from his armpit all the way down to his hip. When he turned and grabbed my ladder rack post, I could see his lat muscles. Like I said, I saw the moonlight come through the hair on his shoulders, but the back muscles, he looked like a bodybuilder. He was lean, and the ladder racks came to here on him. He was looking over the ladder racks at the tent, and they came to his clavicle. So I had something I could measure for his height.
Yeah.
So I measured, it was 7 foot even. The ladder racks at the top were 7 foot, and he was neck and head taller than that.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes him 8.5 foot tall easy.
Yeah. That's incredible. And it could be like what we spoke about earlier, like how they'll try to divert your attention elsewhere. Maybe something else was going on while one was clinking the propane tanks. It's hard to say.
Well, I don't think they had a clue that I was in the bed, in the cab of the truck.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't think they had a clue. Or the big one would have certainly never stood there for me to get to see his whole body.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point too.
So every activity that I had there, I think we can attribute as what they would do if they think they're alone. It was very stealthy.
So this is what they do when they think no one's around. They come out in the open, and they're pretty confident.
And still place the truck between him in case somebody comes out of the tent.
Yeah. Like you see people show evidence, like where you'll see like this big handprint like on the side of like a house or like on a window, and it's like they've obviously been in the yard. And yeah, it's incredible
Yeah.
what they do when they think no one's around.
But my entire encounter, I laid out where I show where it happened in the park. I've got pictures from in the park where I think it's the big male and the juvenile. I got pictures while I was in the campsite, close up on a camera where it's, but anyways, it's washed out white. But I lay it all out there. I show the pictures. I play the audio of the owls of them. It was the recording of them doing the owl calls. And I'm like you, tech heavy. I think that's what it's going to call for, us being tech heavy, and let equipment that gets better and better and better over time do the work for us. But we still have to be where they're at. I mean, you can't take that off the table. You're not going to get any Bigfoot stuff if you're not putting yourself out where the Bigfoots are. But
absolutely.
do everything you can to get the better tech until we can get this thing solved.
I go with what I know and experienced in the past. And a lot of people say, oh, they're never going to show themselves if you have a camera. They're never going to show themselves if you have a rifle and you're out there hunting. But that's when I've had the experiences. I'd be out there rifle hunting or bow hunting. Or one night they showed up around my house, and it was nighttime, and I had a spotlight, and you can just see a bunch of eyes bobbing up and down. And I thought, that's deer. That's deer for sure, because the spotlight wouldn't penetrate into the woods across the yard. And one of the sets of eyes went up to about, I kid you not, like 12, 13 feet. It rose like an elevator. Wow. And then another one came from the opposite direction. I heard it for a few minutes until he crossed this clearing, and it was a big gray white one. But whenever I had that spotlight out, I had my camera out the whole time. But the camera, I didn't know how to run the camera on manual to where you set like the ISO, the shutter speed. So it was on auto, and it just looked pitch black even with the spotlight. But I even flipped it on night vision. Like, they didn't care that I had a camera. Like, they did what they were, I don't know, they were up to something. They didn't care what I was doing. They probably knew I was there, but I don't know.
You know, it's weird. I mean, and there's nothing you can do about it. I can hardly take what anybody says because that's their experience. And a lot of times an experience is skewered. It's skewered with how you took in your information, your emotions, what medications you're on, your emotional quotient. You know, how I'm telling you, there are so many things that's going to influence the fear that you're under when things happen, and your excitement level and how you interpret things. You know, and that's kind of why I gravitated towards Shane. I mean, he's like me when it comes to, you know, all of the training that he's done with the, you know, the martial arts and the MMA and all that kind of stuff. You know, you initially would go in with a lot of fear of who your opponent is. Am I going to get hurt? You had to learn to control that, and so there's a lot of self-discipline. Yeah. If you are not a self-disciplined person, you're going to struggle in this arena. And that's why I told you I was glad to see you working on some self-discipline things that because you hone your skills and your self-disciplining yourself in certain areas, then calming yourself down when shit gets dicey out here is almost easy if you've gone through, quitting smoking and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can go both ways. Like if you win in the arena, you can let it get to your head where you don't train enough anymore because you think you're the big dog on the block and then get hurt later on. But you also have to deal with losing and being okay with losing. Like, how am I going to come back and come out on top next time and avoid this from happening? And it's the same way out here. Like when you miss stuff and you do have the gear, like how am I going to be prepared?
How can I fix that?
How can I fix that? What kind of gear can I get together? I had the recorders, but why didn't I have it ready? Or it happens and you're in shock and you don't even think about grabbing your camera or anything. You're just so tuned in and your brain's trying to figure out what the heck is that. And sometimes it takes like weeks or even months after it happened to be like, that was a freaking Bigfoot. And you start hearing other people talk about the same thing and you're like, that's probably what that was. You don't always think about it.
I mean, I've made changes to my thermal camera. Like there were times when wanting to go through the brush, I would have my thermal camera on top of a walking stick. Very difficult in pitch dark with nothing but branches and briars and thickets to try to get that thing through things. It's just catching on everything. So now I've made it to where I can just pop the camera out, drop the whole walking stick, and go through some tight spaces with me just hand holding the little camera. And if you're not making changes to help you get what you want, then don't be surprised if you're not moving forward.
Yeah, you could have all the gear that you need, but if you don't have everything fine-tuned, all the settings
dialed in,
fine-tune it, you're not going to capture what you want. Because I've also had my audio recorders where they're turned all the way up, and just everything just sounds too
super
loud.
Yeah,
and it sucks. Everything's got to be perfect.
Right. Yeah, get yourself out where they're at, learn your equipment, and constantly make adjustments. One of these days we're going to get lucky, because we're doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And eventually, if you do this long enough, the stars will align. But you got to be prepared when it happens. But for those who don't know who Shane is, he's got a video on Amazon, I believe, or some other outlets about a property called the 400. And he's found a lot of evidence out there. You've joined up with them, and you guys have come across a lot of neat and interesting things along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very unique situation. I can't be for sure it's the same as it is now because things change. Family dynamics of the Bigfoots change. We've already lived through the first set of juvenile siblings that we had wonderful activity with. I mean, and now that they've moved on, grown up and moved on and been replaced by younger ones, we've got different evidence out there, but it's not the same. It's not the same demeanor. It's not the same. They don't seem to be as coming in as close as the first two juveniles did, even though it's the same mother, same father.
Maybe their curiosity level's different because they've learned from the previous ones.
Who knows? Who knows? Who knows? I mean, the footprints are still being found. Shane just had a green marble left at the baiting station. So there's still stuff going on, just not what we were used to. So maybe it'll change. I don't know.
And you guys have found a lot of tracks out there.
Oh yeah. Shane's found a lot of tracks.
Yeah.
And one time it was while I was out there. It had rained the night before or the day before, and then Shane was out there looking, and he come running into camp. You got any hydrocal? And I was like, yeah, I got a whole box up in my vehicle. I got to go get it. Well, there's some tracks. There's some new tracks. So there was a nice trackway that was found the night that we were there. The next morning they were found. So yeah, most of the time Shane will go down there on his weekends and stuff and check things out and come across things to try to establish what patterns are there. But it is what it is. Been lucky with a lot of foot tracks. So
yeah, that's cool. And you guys casted those?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Shane's got probably 100 of them casted over 4 years, where you see the same tracks getting bigger and bigger and changing as they got to 12 inches from starting at 7 or 8 inches. So they look very human when they're the smaller ones, which is why they're hard to find, because you're going to assume they're human. And then as they start to get around 11, 12, they start to change to the more flat, big, robust for the body weight type changes. That makes some physical changes in the foot.
Yeah, and I'm assuming they were found by like a lake or a pond or a creek.
In some mud flats, a
Yeah.
creek, a spring-fed creek that had some exposed mud flats in the hot summer months as water retreats, and it's in those mud flats.
Yeah, because most of Missouri is hard, rocky
Yeah,
soil.
a lot of rock.
Yeah. Well,
So
that's cool.
that's why this place was so lucky. So
Yeah. Okay. Have you encountered them again after that incident?
after the park,
Yeah.
well, I mean, when I caught a juvenile at Bennett Springs in 2013, and I witnessed a behavior that paid off for us later at the 400 when I saw the same behavior of a little heat signature out in the field, and I watched it, and it did the same thing that happened when I saw that juvenile at Bennett Springs. And I told Shane, I said, that's one right out there. I said, it's doing the same thing that one did in 2000. And so Shane starts going out there, and it was a juvenile, and that's when he walked out on the juvenile, got about 8 foot away, shined a light in its face. So that was all culminated because of the behavior that I had captured in 2013. I recognized that as behavior of just a little heat signature out there in the field, to watch it long enough to see what it does, and then and correlate it to the other behavior and say, that's a Bigfoot because of what it's doing and how it's doing it. And for him to go out there and shine a light in its face when he got there confirmed all of that happened before that, to put the patterns together works.
Yeah. It's the little things that you pick up on and learn.
So that's what we'll do tonight. You and I go walking around. I mean, I'm looking for any little heat signature, and a lot of times we got to stop and let my camera watch them and if they move a particular way, we're going to throw the headsets on, and you're going to go in there.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
I'll be like, little to your left, little to your right. All right, he's right there behind that brush. Turn your light on.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. I'm game.
And I'll film you.
Okay. Cool. Whatever you want to do, man. What's the goals for this evening and for this trip with the coming days? We're going to throw up the Autel, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
The Autel thermal drone. And you have the audio recorders and logs. We're going to deploy those.
Yeah, I got to keep one for camp. I need to hear what's happening around my tent at night. So that's the one with the cord. But the other two, we can set out in strategic locations. But yeah, if we find a good spot, say like down by a creek or something, and be like, hey, this is a good spot, we'll just leave it there and then pick them up tomorrow, or whatever. Basically just see what kind of traffic's moving through. If something's coming through to get to our campsite or something like that, then it'll be monitored more than once. It'll be monitored coming up the creek or down the creek and coming across this way, and then my recorder here will pick up when it gets here, if it gets here and does something. So maybe we'll find an egress, an entrance and an egress location using other recorders. Who knows? It's just a hit and miss, cat and mouse kind of thing.
Yeah. So, I don't know about you, but like when we were doing that interview, did you hear little things behind you, like little sounds,
Yeah.
little things? I'm not saying it's Bigfoot, but
It's until I get my log out and I can really hear what's going on further out of our hearing range. That's where I need to be hearing. It's just I can't differentiate between just about anything falling out of a tree until I can get further away and then hear it much louder because the parabolic is louder.
It all seems to be happening behind you, though.
Yeah, and it's significant that I said that from being when I was in the hammock. I was like, what's going on down there?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So what do you think these creatures are?
Well,
Beings, creatures, whatever you want to call them.
I think the only logical answer is that there's some kind of intelligent human hybrid, whatever. I mean, the science doesn't matter to me what science says, or even somebody trying to be scientific. They think like a human. They plan like a human. They know their actions have consequences if they get it wrong. All of that says human to me. And given what they look like, when I first saw that big one, it looked like a gorilla. He walked like a gorilla. He was stooped over like a gorilla. I'm thinking it's a gorilla. Didn't take me long after that to realize that they are far from gorillas. We better start thinking about what's between the ears and not just what the body looks like.
Yeah.
They are super intelligent, communicate well, with all the communications that I even described with my encounter, that means they had to sit down and have a discussion about what to do, what it means, when I need you to do it. It's just, you can't do that without language. So that's on the table. There's certainly language, the mimicry, the nonverbal communications, the incredible repertoire of nonverbal communications. Of course, I talked to somebody who said that she was watching a female eating some fruits off of a tree, and she said she had two little twins. She said they had to have been twins because they were the same size. They looked like maybe 3 or 4 year old human children, but covered in hair. And she said they were kind of frolicking around the tree while the female was eating fruit, kicking off the tree, jumping up and kicking off the tree and kind of tussling with each other, just like you would expect kids to be doing. And she said they started to wander quite a distance away. And she said that female never stopped eating with the one hand, but took her other hand and slapped her thigh. And immediately, each one of them ran back, and each one grabbed some of the hairs on her leg, on each leg. That suggests to me that they discipline their young, that they discipline them in a way where there is no question, you get over here when I say get over here. They've probably gotten their butts swatted. They probably gotten the back of their head cuffed until they learned, when I do that, that means you get over here, and there's no questions asked. And we have found that at the 400 with the sticks being dug, where the holes are being dug by that one with the 6-inch tracks. Every one of the holes had a stick left in the hole with dirt still on the stick. What is going on there? I said something has to be happening in mid-stroke for them to leave immediately. That means that little one is entertaining himself digging holes while mom is doing something, getting fruits off the pawpaw trees, looking for crawdads. And every time she says, she may not even say, it's time to go. She may just start walking away, and he's been disciplined enough to just leave the stick and go with her. That's what every one of them holes would suggest, that the hole is left mid-play. Mm-hmm. And the only way that's working is because there's a discipline involved, and there's no questions asked. You would think that you would find the stick carried away and dropped somewhere else, but it's always left in the hole, like it's in mid-stroke. We got to go. And why are you so afraid that you got to leave the stick there every time? Well, I think they're disciplined.
I think that's a good point about the discipline, because if you listen to the Sierra sounds, they're bickering back and forth.
With the little one and mom.
Yeah, like someone's in trouble by the bigger one. And Ron Moorhead talks about how he was cooking up a big pot of stew. Maybe the little ones are coming in, and the older male is going to discipline them. And then you hear the female probably trying to protect the little ones from getting smacked upside the head. But I mean, it's hard to say what really happened, but...
Did you hear the audio that we got at the 400?
No.
It's got that argument that you're talking about that shows the little one and the mom arguing. We got that.
Really? Like the chattering, the...
Yes. You want to hear it? You got to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's cool.
And it was at the time we found the 6-inch tracks. Okay. So we know there's a little one there, and it sounds just like the Sierra sounds. So we're thinking that little one was being chastised by mom somehow, and they were kind of bickering.
Yeah.
But just you can see his head and shoulders sitting on the ground.
Oh yeah, yeah, that looks upright. If you want, just hold it up to the camera if you want to show that. I'll take that. I can set it over here so it don't fall.
Well, it's not that great.
Okay, no, that's fine.
It's not that great.
Yeah, whatever you want to show.
Not like this audio. As soon as I find this audio.
That's very interesting.
You can hear a little chirping in there too, like it's the little one.
Yeah.
Like mom is scolding it, and you're hearing some chirps. That's exactly what you'd hear on the Sierra sounds.
Yeah. So you hear like the bigger one at first.
And it's the one going like, boy, you're getting on my last nerve.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of what I was thinking too. And then you got like that bickering back and forth where it's scolding the little one possibly.
And that's the day that the female producer was using the restroom and saw the little one running down the creek. So the little one was getting caught. Mom was probably over that shit.
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever I seen that juvenile, he scurried on all fours, hid behind an oak tree, and like in slow motion, I just saw like a jet black arm hide. And I was like, oh man, I've seen that before. Whatever it is, it's gone now. I missed whatever it was, and I was just staring at the tree that it hid behind, and then he just stepped out. But he was looking away from me, and I was just sitting there watching him the whole time. And he turned towards me, and when he saw me, his eyes shot open like he just saw a demon.
Couldn't believe that he was being looked
and
at.
He shot down like that, like a fish, like that spooks in the water, like he was gone that fast. And you didn't hear like it run off. Like when he hid behind that tree, he was gone. It was like a Houdini move. So I don't know if he kept the tree in between me and like scurried away like a spider silently, or what the heck happened.
Fascinating.
Yeah. But yeah, he was just shocked.
I
can't believe.
Let's just get our own damn story tonight.
Yeah, let's
get something good.
Absolutely.
So we'll have a good story to tell.
Yeah, let's get to work. I want to set up the audio recorders and make sure we're ready to go. All right, Randy, thank you very much for sharing your encounters, your experiences, and the tactics that you use out in the field. I often wonder with people that live out in forested areas, whenever they go to bed at night, if the Sasquatch come out into their yards, look into the trash cans, peek through the windows, and rummage around. I think it's possible, and they know when we're asleep. I hear a lot of encounter stories where people fall asleep in their tents, and that's when these things come out. Randy's encounter story was pretty interesting, and it sounds like the Sasquatch had no idea that he was in the tent, but from my experience, they normally know if you're around. Maybe it thought that Randy was asleep, and that could be possibly what happened. Randy has a typical researcher's mentality whenever it comes to these creatures, and he believes it's some type of unknown hominid or primate species. As you guys know, I do believe there's a paranormal aspect behind it, but nonetheless, I do believe they are flesh and blood. I appreciate everyone for tuning in today and following the channel. Until the next one, be safe everyone, and take care.